This is Sprint 0 for AR West Point. Our agenda is to go through our product vision, our sprint goal, go over our capacity, as well as present the products that we created during the sprint, recommendations, and plans for future work. Our product vision is to create an application while using augmented reality to represent a Revolutionary War fortress while meeting the history department's requirements and making while creating an app that is user-friendly for all ages.
So the history team has 3 main deliverables that they want to see out of the app. The first stop is going to be Colonel Willis, and he will meet us at the top of the stairs, and he will present a mission statement and discuss the reasons behind building the fort and the process of building it. Next, the user can move to stop 2, which is where the guns are placed, and there they'll be met by a matros who was a private and artilleryman in the Revolutionary War, and there they'll be able to hear about the process of what it's like to man and fire a cannon, and they'll also be able to click on the cannon, learn about why it's there and the different kinds of cannons that were at West Point. The third stop, towards the back of the fort, there will be a lieutenant. He's going to discuss the day-to-day lives of his soldiers and present a few different case studies to leave the user with the question of what they would do if they were in charge. Also at this stop, there will be information about muskets. Similar to the cannon, you'll be able to click on the musket, scroll through the different types of weapons used by soldiers during the Revolutionary War, and learn what it was like to fire it.
Our sprint goal is to gain knowledge on AR concepts, understand last year's work and lessons that we can learn from that, as well as practice the sprint process and understand our team dynamics and where our strengths and weaknesses are. So for our capacity, we expected to work for 63 hours. However, we fell short of that at only working 48 hours. As you can see on our burn down chart, we were on track to complete our 63 hours. However, we failed to understand that the lesson 3 would be dedicated towards presentations, in which we had expected to complete actual work during that time. In our sprint backlog, we still have multiple cards that we had accounted for to do during lesson 3. However, because we had to adjust and do our presentation lesson 3, we were unable to finish them.
So in order to achieve our sprint goal of attaining skills necessary to start on the project, we have done several things. So we studied a little bit about ARKit on Udacity, and then we also gained basic background in Swift 3 as well as iOS 11. So to showcase what we did here, on Plural site we watched a video that's about 4 hours, and we follow all the instructions in there, so it took around 4 hours. This is for Swift 3, and for iOS 11 it also took around 4 hours and 22 minutes, so total of 8-ish hours for basic programming. And for ARKit, which is still in progress, we have done lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3, and lesson 4, which that's where we are still working on. Each of these lessons took average of 2 hours, and then this required us to interact with the Mac, and which required us to kind of get used to the Mac, which took a little more time.
So in addition to actually researching the code that we would have to use in the various languages and capabilities that we need for that, we also looked at last year's group's products and the documents that they put out. So we looked at the AAR comments that they had put on the SharePoint so that we wouldn't fall into the same pitfalls that they had fallen into. We also looked at their old sprint review videos, so we could get an idea of how their sprint reviews went, as well as seeing the functionality of the app and the features that they had actually managed to get implemented, as well as how the app was supposed to look so that we would have an idea when we loaded it up ourselves. From there, we went to the GitHub page that they had set up that had all of the code. We pulled down the code onto the iMacs that we had been provided with, and then we set about making sure that it would actually compile and then run on these computers. This turned out to be more challenging than we had expected because they hadn't provided a continuity document. So we created our own after going through the troubleshooting of that so that we could give this to the next group in the future, as well as anyone else that would have to download it onto an iMac. It basically included downloading some additional dependencies and doing some stuff in the terminal window. So from there, we got to do a nice code review of the code that last year's group had done. This was made significantly easier by the fact that pretty much every line of code that they had put in, they commented. So that was very nice. After we had finally gotten all of that to compile, we loaded up the app itself, which meant that we got to see the functionality in the simulator at least. We weren't able to get it onto an actual iPad yet, but we got to see where each of the geopoints were. We unfortunately were not able to get the AR to work, but that's definitely a goal for the next sprint, to be able to see and use the AR that they had actually implemented, as well as getting the GPS functionality to think that we're not in New York City.
This is the previous group's IRB application. I've looked through it and began to understand how the previous group conducted their user studies. I've also contrasted this with their user test plan to further understand how the design principles arose in their final product. I contrasted with these design principles with the Design Rarity Things by Don Norman and began my research to understand the foundation of these principles and understanding their implementation into the final application. The second task was to hone the skills necessary in order to be able to code an augmented reality kit, and that was done through taking classes in Pluralsight with Swift 3 and then taking classes in Udacity as well with the AR kit in Swift. The last task was to understand the sprint review process, to which we referred back to the previous group's work and watched all of their sprint videos, as well as learning as we go as a team. The final task was to research the graphic design contractors that we will be using, and these are the companies that we decided to stick with. We have Gravity Jack, Indie, Zico, Kagizo, Cortex Studios, and 1000 Realities. We've all reached out to these companies to ask for a quote on what they charge per hour.
For recommendations on how we can improve our future sprints would be our expected hours are inconsistent with the actual hours that we were able to complete. As we said earlier, a large majority of this is understanding what lessons are allocated towards. For example, we thought that the third lesson in this sprint was allocated towards the work when it was actually allocated towards our presentation. Third, we need to understand how long it takes to work with some of the AR kit technologies and the coding technologies. We expected it to take far less time than it actually did. And then fourth, we need to allocate hours properly, meaning most of our hours were allocated towards the IT and CS portions of the project, and we failed to allocate some of the hours towards our history department team members. Here's a roadmap for future work. Our next sprint is going to be mainly focused on making sure we can find a graphic designer to help us out with some of the work, gaining expertise in Xcode, and then meeting with our stakeholder, which is the history department, and make sure we have a full list of requirements and understanding of what they are wanting us to accomplish with this project.